And so this is how we've got the standards. In what sense are these state-led? In what sense do the governors have any say in this? Right? The chief governor, who would theoretically be, who is at the head of the NGA, she pulled her state out of it. Right? There's no sense in which this was state-led. So, for all of Bill Gates' money, and for all of the crony power that these 5 unaccountable people had in overseeing the writing of the standards, how did they get them into your schools? What power did Gates have to put this junk into your schools? What power does David... Well, money's certainly is helpful, but you guys in particular know this, right? You've been watching government for the last 30 years, particularly at the federal level. You know we have a federal government that doesn't let you do what it does. It's very jealous. In fact, for the last 30 years, our federal government has been much more concerned about letting you do less so it can do more. Do you honestly think the Department of Education at the federal level would have let these people who are unaccountable, who have very little... What is Bill Gates' educational background? Do you honestly think the federal government would have allowed this into your schools if they didn't want it? Do you honestly think some rogue billionaire could have bought his way into the schools this way if the federal government wasn't supportive of that? Ask yourself this. How did it happen? You've all heard of Race to the Top, right? What is Race to the Top? Well, that was a federal program back in 2009, 2010, 2011. It's ongoing. The President of the United States, way back before Common Core was even written, now I want you to emphasize that, they created Race to the Top back when they were stimulating things. You remember? They were stimulating banks and car companies, pretty much everything except the economy. Given all that money. And so what they wanted to do was they wanted to stimulate education as well. So what they did is they set aside $6 billion initially, and it's much higher now, of federal money, your money, and they doled it out to state education departments. And there were no stipulations. Here, you want to apply in various years for Race to the Top money, apply for grants, and even if you didn't, some states didn't get grants. Even if you didn't get an initial Race to the Top grant, simply by accepting Common Core, you were allowed to sign a Race to the Top contract, and money came in all over the place to your state. All right? I'll give you an example. Back in 2009, again, before the standards were really written, the state of New York received $700 million from the federal government just for signing up for Race to the Top. And do you know what the only real proviso in Race to the Top was for the states that took it? And we're talking 46 states. Any state that took any Race to the Top money was obligated to accept the Common Core when it was finally written. That's how 46 states got it without seeing it. How in the world is this state-led? So simply by taking the money, this is where we ended up here. Not all states got initial Race to the Top grant money, but all states who have Common Core have money coming in from the federal government, and that's the big allure and draw of it. Now ask yourself this question too. How is this not federal? When they tell you it's not federal, they point to that stupid copyright. And you see how careful the copyright is to tell you it's not federal? It's just us. These two that should bother us, right? That 2 lobbyist groups own the whole thing. Because you can't affect. How do you get a hold of them? Well, you vote out of office. How are you going to get David Coleman on the line to tell him what you think? Where's the representative government in all of this, given that public education is public? It's ours, it's not theirs. But ask yourself the question I always ask. Do you think the people who support Common Core would continue to do it if the standards were exactly the same? But if instead of the Bill and Melinda Gates people, what if it was the Koch brothers who put up $1 billion? And what if instead of 2 left-leaning lobbyist groups, you had 2 right-leaning ones? And what if instead of a very liberal president, you had a very conservative one, who basically put up about $6 billion of American taxpayer money to bribe a bunch of states to take curriculum standards that they had never seen? Do you think the people who support it now would support it? I don't. I would still be as opposed to it as I am now, if it was coming from the right. The only silver lining of Common Core, if it had happened that way, can you imagine Harry Reid in the Senate if the Koch brothers did it? His head would explode all over the Senate floor, wouldn't it? And yet, you see what I mean about Banana Republic stuff, and you see what I mean too. This is federal. There's nothing in Common Core that would have allowed it to put itself in your schools. Over 40 states took it precisely because of the federal program Race to the Top. And it is the federal government's program, Race to the Top, Arne Duncan and Barack Obama, it is their program that requires states who took money to take the standards. That's the obligation. And that's where we sit today. That's a big myth, that these are state-led. And you think about the way this was done. This is, say what you will about the Affordable Care Act. Say what you will about health care. It had its hearing in the House and the Senate. It went to the Supreme Court. This is equally, I think this is more transformational than that. And it's never had any of those things. And again, I respectfully insist that the only reason it's in your schools, and if this isn't federal, so you're bribing states to take it, right? Here's a big wad of money, and all you have to do is accept something you haven't seen. Now you're bribing states who want to get out. How about, is it Lee County? Oh man, the country was just weeping for you, Florida, when you had a school board that the first one in Florida that tried to pull out. And then they got to that one woman, didn't they? And what was the big concern why she recanted her vote at the 11th hour? We're going to lose out on a lot of federal money. So the federal government now, that has nothing to do with this, who bribed states like Florida to take it, is now telling states like Florida and states that want to back out like Indiana or Oklahoma, well, you can, but if you back out, we're going to withhold your entire federal education budget. This has nothing to do with the federal government, but you bribe states to take it and you're blackmailing states to try to get out of it. Do you know that about 6 months ago, Arne Duncan, the Secretary of Education, began sending federal agents into various schools across the country just to be sure that those schools and school districts were implementing Common Core the way the federal government thought it ought to be implemented. You've got, and this is easy, you got to check that out online. Arne Duncan is sending federal agents into schools across this country to make sure they're putting this in exactly the way the federal government wants it. But your benighted politicians and benighted school officials who support this, they're going to tell you it's we have state and local control. It's not federal. One thing I like to do, particularly for an audience like this, it's useful. We live in a strange world, and you're one of the audiences that I speak to that really understands this. If you amass a bunch of facts on a subject, but you happen to be a conservative or a Christian or a Republican, suddenly your facts don't make any sense because you are a tinfoil hat-wearing right-winger. So you are immediately dismissed, and I confess to being all of those things, a Christian, a conservative, and by definition, a tinfoil hat-wearing nut job, because that's what we all are, right? That's how they treat us. So what I like to do during this talk is to take about 25 minutes and show you all the right-wing lunatics who support Common Core, who oppose it. That's the only thing they have. And all the talks that I've given, that's all they come back with. They never engage with the data, they never answer. When you try to talk to your schools about how we got Common Core, look, they're going to tell you. It doesn't matter, they're just standards. Let's talk about the standards. As if it's somehow, who's paying for it doesn't matter. As if somehow the ideological motivation, or legally or illegally how they got it, doesn't matter. Your schools will not discuss any of this. Your politicians who support Common Core will not discuss all this stuff. They're just standards, let's talk about the standards. Okay, so what I do is, I start by demonstrating that Common Core is anything but a right-wing, merely a right-wing concern. So let's look at some of the right-wingers. Let's start with the two Department of Education lawyers in 2009 who oversaw at the legalities, the legal side of the Department of Education. Two Democrats. They both quit over this. They resigned immediately when Common Core was put in place. And they called it a federal takeover of education. Right? In imposing here they are, Ken Talbert and Robert Eitel. Here's what they said back in 2009. In imposing the Common Core standards on the states, listen to the verb there, by the two lawyers at the Department of Ed, whose job it is to make sure that the Department of Education is in legal compliance with the laws. They said, in imposing Common Core and the test on the states, the federal government is violating 3 statutes and has put America on the road to a national curriculum. That's the second thing that makes it federal. The only reason it's in your schools is because of the federal Race to the Top program, or the federal money that is supporting it. That's the only way. And the tests, all these national tests that your kids have to take, they don't report to the state, to the teachers. They report directly back to the Department of Education and the federal government. You understand, right, that whoever controls the tests controls the curriculum? Your teachers think, and you keep hearing this from some Florida teachers and school administrators, we'll be able to take Common Core and adapt it and adopt it. How in the world are you going to do that when the tests kick in? Bill, I'll show you the quote in a minute. Bill Gates himself said in 2009, when the tests align to the standards, the curriculum will follow as well. That's a feature of this, and he's right. The minute the tests kick in, your teachers, whatever they think they're going to be able to do, are going to be handcuffed. Because the only way of assessing Common Core is these stupid tests, these national tests. You know, there are schools all across the country now, including schools in Florida, who have already came out and said they will no longer offer their own midterm and final exams in the classrooms to their kids. In other words, and the argument, well, our kids are going to be testing so much nationally, it's not fair for us to offer our own tests. So Common Core is really just ramping up here, and your schools are already saying, we will not independently test the kids anymore. So the teachers who are teaching your kids will not offer final exams and midterm exams because the kids take enough national testing. Do you see what a ceding that already is of control of who controls your kids? In imposing, notice the verb, forcing the Common Core standards and the tests on the states, the government's violating three national statutes and put America on the road to a national curriculum. With respect to race to the top Common Core scheme, Eitel and Talbert, former Deputy General Counsel and General Counsel, respectively, of the Department of Ed, concluded that, quote, these standards and the tests will ultimately direct the course of elementary and secondary study in those states that took it, running the risk that states become little more than administrative agents for a national K-12 program, and raising a fundamental question about whether the department is exceeding its statutory boundaries. Not only did they quit, but the two of them have now written a book together. I haven't had time to read it yet. It's relatively new. It's called The Coming Federal Takeover of Education. But don't worry, your superintendent of schools tells you it's not federal. How about this? How about these right-wing kooks? Help me out. I'm an English professor, but I need your help with words. I'm going to give you 5 words. You tell me if there's any way you can rearrange these 5 words to make it come out conservative. New York State Teachers Union. Any way you could, I'm puzzled, right? Because I want you to look at the dates of the slides I'm about to show you. This starts in January of this year. All the information you're about to see comes from this year, after states have had a little more time to look at it. And New York is exactly in the same boat you are. New York is one of 3 states that has had Common Core longer than the rest of the country. You guys, Florida, New York, Kentucky, you are the 3 rollout states. You are the 3 states that got it and had it in your schools and had the textbooks well before Wisconsin and Ohio and most of the rest of the states had it. You've seen more of this. Right? And New York is a much more progressive state than you are. And they're now struggling with this. And it's not just, again, us right-wing lunatic types that are struggling with it. In January of 2014, here's what the New York Teachers Union did. The Teachers Union, the board of New York State Teachers Union on Saturday unanimously voted to withdraw support for Common Core standards as they are being implemented, and they declared no confidence in the superintendent of schools who brought them there. The New York State United Teachers, a union that represents more than 600,000 educational professionals in New York, is also asking the State Board of Regents to fire State Education Commissioner John King, the man who brought it to the state. And although the union previously backed the standards, the union says it will not support the benchmarks, either as implemented or interpreted. That's big. We're not taking, we don't want your standards, and however you try to tweak them, we're not going to want them then if you mess with them. We don't want them. That's huge when you think about it. And what happened in New York that makes them so leery now? Well, the first year they got the standards, they thought they could do whatever they wanted because they had state and local control. So they taught the Common Core, but they also changed it up, and they used a lot of their other time to unteach some of the Common Core lessons. And then, lo and behold, they got their first Common Core test, prototype Common Core test. And the teachers recognized they can't teach what they want. And the second year of Common Core in New York, they had to now go to teach exactly to what was in the tests. And you understand this is a big deal, right? Teachers' unions are some of the most radically progressive things in the country, and the New York Teachers' Union is really bad. And even, you know how it is in unions, right? Rank and file teachers may be Republican or Democrat or anything in between, but to be a union boss, you don't have any right-wing credentials. How about this? That's not enough for you. How about the country's largest teachers' union? How about the NEA? The NEA is now the most powerful union in the country. Now that the UAW has been tamped down, the teachers union, the NEA, spends more money on lobbying and activism than any union in the country, and 99% of that money goes directly to liberal causes. Yep. $250 million of teacher union dues went to fight Governor Walker in the state of Wisconsin. That's what they spend their money on. Notice the date, February 2014. The nation's largest teachers union is pulling back on its once enthusiastic support for Common Core, labeling the rollout, quote, completely botched, unquote. National Education Association President Dennis Van Rokel said, quote, the standards will not succeed without a major course correction, including rewriting the standards and revising the tests with teacher input. Yeah, you heard that right. The tests that your kids are going to have to take were not written